All right. We are live on Facebook. Welcome, everybody. So this is the first episode of our Fall Shelter series. It's continuing NCIP's efforts to reach our community and talk about the work that NCIP is doing and bring in some guests, special guests. This particular series, we're going to be doing one per month, so October, November, December. This is talking about NCIP's, how we're working beyond the courts in the Capitol in this series. And so I am joined today by two esteemed guests, Mr. Obie Anthony and Todd Fries. And we are, in this episode, we are exploring restorative justice. We're going to talk about our efforts of community education on wrongful convictions. And so I wanted to set the context a little bit for this introduction, is to say that life is a journey, right? Life is a journey, exoneration is a journey. Restorative justice, which we'll talk about more later, is a journey. So by way of introduction, Obie, I'm going to put it to you first. Tell us where you are in your journey. What do you want to say?
How you guys, how's everyone doing? Thank you, NCIP, for setting up this series and inviting me to be participatory in it. Todd is a really great guy. I've been knowing him, I don't know how many years it's been now. 8, 7, 8. Yeah, somewhere around in there. And I got introduced to the sort of kind of the restorative justice back then. But where I'm at now in my journey is that, I'm in the third stage going into the fourth quarter of my journey. And then really there's no sort of kind of end to the quarters, but nevertheless, when I think about journey, I think about the first stage of my life, being as a kid, the second stage of my life, being, falsely put in prison, and then the third stage of my life where I'm at now, and being exonerated of those things and being in this body and going into the fourth stage, meaning sort of kind of who I'm going to be now. I'm out working, doing these things. And so I have to say I'm about third quarter of my journey right now. I call it the third quarter. late third quarter. Playing some prevent defense right now.
Okay, so Obie, you were exonerated in 2011, yes. Right? Now you're the founder and executive director of Exonerated Nation. Yes. So can you just give us a little glimpse? We'll talk more about this sprinkled out throughout the session here, but just give us a little, like, that pathway. What are those steps? What happened? How'd you get there?
I mean, like, how I get there is because, so I start back when the moment I walked out of the door, and, NCIP and Loyola Marymount Project for the Innocents was there, family members was there, friends was there. And I was walking out of that door, I didn't know what it was to be, or to be called an exoneree or any of that, right? I was just coming home. It was like, man, I'm out. And so I came home to this body of understanding that I'm in this family now, which we refer to one another as exonerees. And it, so I had a sense of, belongingness, all of those things, and helped me to grow, in other words. And so it's that, I went from, being an exoneree, and I'm still an exoneree. And now as I'm transforming, sort of going into the fourth quarter, late third quarter, after being home 8 years, 9 years now, I'm now sitting in a directive seat of a national nonprofit that helps individuals that was in my situation when I walked out of the door. And so that's what I mean by sort of, that's when we're talking about that journey, and I'm talking about that late third quarter going into the fourth quarter, because I'm still young and new as a director of a national nonprofit. I'm a new dad. I'm a new husband. I'm all of these things now. And I'm an exoneree too as well. And when I go out and I introduce myself, I talk about my exoneration, but I also emphasize, I talk my first thing on my mouth. I'm founder of a national organization, and I address myself as a director of an organization. And so, it's a transition, it's a journey, and you live in who you are. And I think for me that my exoneree me, is the pit that burns within me that keeps me going. It's where I come from. It's who I am.
Okay, so I know that the other day we talked about this. So Obie, tell us the origin of exonerate, please.
Right now, this is a 1520 word. Now, I'm gonna bust this out because we need to be really clear because I think, it's power in words and it's education in words. It's a lot of enthusiasm in words. And so, I went back to go look up the word exonerate because, I love words, etymology of the words and that. And I want you to understand. So listen to the definition. The way when it was brought to the English language in 1520, it set out to say the definition of it is to unload, to disburden, right? In a literal sense, now obsolete. So it becomes now obsolete. Imagine that, obsolete. Then it moves on in this definitional sort of kind of phrasing and playing with words in 1570, and it gets into this. It says, as relieved of a charge. So now they're getting a little bit more descriptive in respect to the exonerate, as relieved in a charge. And so it just set me in my mind like, man, I read through all of these definitions of exonerate, and it was like, now here we are in 2020. And as I realized that the definition, it didn't change, but it grew in its understanding that now innocence is supposed to be there too as well. Because what it is to be exonerated of a crime is to be shown to be innocent of that. And I think that there is the reason why we need to go back and look at, as they always say, and again in the system, right? What was the language intent, right? What was the intent for that? And I think the intended definition there was to free a person of something in which they didn't do in its literal sense.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And also just on that topic of words and etymology, restitution, we talked about compensation versus restitution. Let's just put that out on the table too. Like what's that? What does that mean to you, and what do you know about it?
I mean, so I had never really looked at it like that. I was talking to a friend of mine, young lady named Lisa Ray, who does restorative justice. She runs Restorative Justice International. And we were talking about one of our friends, which is Maurice and Carwell, and talking about his case and compensation and things like that. And she was like, and she said something during the course of our conversation, and she used the word restitution. And I was like, wait a minute, what did you say, restitution? She was like, yeah, restitution. And then so I was like, man, it made so much sense because there's a major difference between the two words, right? Restitution is to make someone whole. To compensate is to have someone to show that a harm was done, right? And that's why we have this problem now with the Victims' Compensation Board, because we got to go through that. And we should be we should be restoring these individuals. And so restitution, when in its form in respect to when it comes to exonerate or exonerated, that we should make, again, that word, again, definition applies there, to restore, restitute, bring back. And so it just makes more sense. It's just a more understandable conversation to have with individuals when we talk about restitution, and when we talk about that versus compensation. And again, I cannot deny it. It has that biblical thing to it too as well, because there we talk about to restore when crimes were happened. It was a restitution that was applied. It was a restorative action that happened. And so, and it has its tenets of restorative justice too as well. So, I think it all works.
Awesome. Thank you, Obie. I'm going to toss it to Todd now here. Hello, Todd. Thank you for joining us. And so let's start with the journey. So first of all, who are you? How did you get involved? What's your journey? What would you say as you lay that out?
My NCIP journey. Well, let me just start by saying my name is Todd Fries. I'm NCIP's Associate Director. I've been with NCIP for almost 11 years now. I started as a research fellow, then a research attorney, then operations director, and now associate director. I've had a million titles at NCIP, but one of the things I love about my job is that it's varied. I get to do a lot of different types of work, one of which is to help educate the community. So I'm happy to be here so I can tell you about my NCIP journey. So let me tell you how I got started at NCIP. Some of you might not know this, but NCIP is a clinical program of Santa Clara University School of Law. So we provide law students with an opportunity to investigate and litigate cases and to help with our policy work. So many years ago, when I was a Santa Clara law student, I was fortunate enough to be accepted into the NCIP program, which I should say is one of the finest in the country. And my experience in the program was life-changing. And I've heard other former attorney or former students, now attorneys, say this, but it was really foundational for how I would spend the rest of my career. So as a law student, I got to visit clients in prison. I got to do witness interviews. I got to go on investigation trips and to really be an integral part of the work that NCIP was doing. And while doing that, also learning about all of the issues with the criminal justice system. And so one of the cases that I worked on as a student was Armando Ortiz, who we helped to exonerate in 2008. And I think that doing the work and seeing the injustice and then seeing the tangible result of an exoneration had a really big impact on me. So I graduated in 2009 with a certificate in public interest in social justice. And then, common sense would say I would go work for a corporate law firm, which is what I did, but mostly because my law school loans were through the roof. Though I should say we work with a lot of corporate law firms, as pro bono partners, and they are just as dedicated to this issue as we are. So in some ways, maybe that does make sense. But at the firm, I was unfulfilled with my work, and I knew I had to get my foot back in the door with NCIP. So this was back in 2009, which at the time was considered like one of the worst legal job markets in recent history, present time excluded. So I took a leap of faith and I resigned my position at the firm. And the very next day, I met with Linda Starr, who's NCIP's co-founder and executive director. And I said, how can I get my foot in the door with NCIP? This is where I want to be. And it just so happened that a fellowship had recently opened up and that they were looking to fill. And so I applied, I received the fellowship, and the rest is history. I've been with NCIP ever since. I haven't regretted my decision to leave the law firm for a second, because my journey up to being an actual staff member and now being associate director has been just amazing.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so what can you talk about what NCIP is doing as far as community education? We'll get into the nitty gritty on restorative justice in just a moment, but just in general, what community education efforts NCIP is partaking in?
Sure. So NCIP educates students, professionals, and the general public. We educate students because, as I mentioned, we're a law clinic, so students have a hand in everything that we do. We usually have 15 to 20 law students that work with us annually. And since these students are our future judges and prosecutors and defense attorneys and jurors, it's important that they understand where the system can go wrong, and that they understand their professional and ethical obligations. So that's one way that we help educate the community. But we also take on volunteers and interns who assist us with our work. So by working with us, they also learn about wrongful convictions. We host training and symposia for professionals and the public. We've held large-scale symposia, 300 plus attendees on eyewitness identification best practices and conviction review units. And then we've done smaller trainings that are topic specific, such as interpreting DNA mixtures or how to or challenging particular types of wrongful conviction cases. And we're often asked by the Innocence Network to run trainings at the annual conference for other innocence attorneys. We get a ton of speaker requests, so we're always out in the community doing speaking engagements. We get a ton of requests, so NCIP staff are constantly at high schools, universities, speaking to religious groups, professional groups, corporations, you name it. We've probably spoken there before. And then finally, we organize and we host events for exonerated individuals and their family members. Last year, we had an Exonerate Summit, our first Exonerate Summit, which was amazing. The year prior, we did a storytelling workshop, and then which we also did back in 2012. And then we've hosted 3 restorative justice retreats for exonerated individuals, their family members, crime victims, and NCIP staff, which I know we'll get more into. But we're constantly out in the community working with stakeholders that can help improve our justice system. So That's,
Awesome.
yeah.
Thank you. And before we transition into talking about restorative justice, can you talk about, because you've had such a connection and long work with NCIP, how has this work impacted you?
I think the work has impacted me both positively and negatively. I mean, I feel fortunate to be able to do this work. It's extremely fulfilling, and I've gotten to meet so many amazing people that I wouldn't have been able to meet had I not been doing this work. But at the same time, there is what's called a secondary trauma that many attorneys and staff experience when they're doing this work. So I think seeing the struggle of our clients, hearing their stories day in and day out can have, somewhat of a traumatic effect on the staff that deal with these cases. And I don't think that I was aware, and I don't think a lot of attorneys are aware of the trauma or the trauma that they experience. But I know that when they go visit clients in prison and the meeting ends and they get to go home and their client has to stay there, that they feel it.
Yeah.
I don't think that I fully realized it until I got involved with the restorative justice, and I got to listen to the stories firsthand, and I got to cry with the participants at the retreats, and I got to laugh and experience all of these emotions, and really create that connection, that I really understood how this work was affecting me. But I look at innocence work as my life's work. So regardless of the difficulties, I feel lucky to be able to help in any way that I can, whether it be, putting on events, doing research, doing casework, whatever it may be. I feel fortunate to be where I am. And yeah.
Thank you. And that's a really great transition. So let's talk about restorative justice. Let's, first of all, what is restorative justice? So both of you take that question on, and in your own experience, in your own way, tell us what restorative justice is. And we'll start with Obie.
I mean, like, all right, I definitely take a stab at that. But let me tap into something that Todd just mentioned right there in respect to the attorneys is concerned. That was something, in other words, that I had recognized early on during the process of my evidentiary hearing and through the process of them reinvestigating the case during the time of when I was falsely in prison. When seeing the attorneys to come up there to see me, the students that was coming in to see me, and then to later on, because it was happening periodically, to see the effect on them in the way that they was taking on the case. They was literally taking on the case. It was affecting them, and they had this, and so by the time I say that to say, by the time we got to the evidentiary hearing and the judge was ready to rule with his ruling, I remember when the attorneys came back there to the lockup room where I was at, and they were all in the room, and they all had this look on their face like, now, like, we don't know how this is gonna be, what's gonna happen, any of the above. And I can feel the way that they had a nervousness in them about what was gonna happen. So it made me understand that they had more than they had concern. And so I can see the effect on it, and that didn't happen that day, how that would affect them. And I've heard from a couple of attorneys since then that was involved in that case about, man, had that not happened, what this would have done and how we would have been. But just getting over to the, so I say that to say that I recognized that a while ago, Todd, and I'm glad that you spoke to that, because I think that's very important to speak on in respect to sort of being considered about, we talk about PTSD, we talk about prison post-traumatic stress. We need to also think about the traumatic stress, in other words, that the staff and attorneys also faces during the course of they reinvestigating the case, and also doing fighting the case when it does happen and when it doesn't happen in successful manners, because it has an effect on everyone. So but and for me, I think that's what restorative justice is too, right? Is that it is getting into that. I've had a chance to participate in, it was all three of those restorative justice events, maybe two of them, that NCIP had kicked off, and that's when I got introduced to restorative justice, in the sense of the tenets, and in the sense of sort of applicable opportunities. In other words, how we can use restorative justice in our everyday life, with our family members, with our friends, at work, and specifically, particularly when it came to us being framed and put in prison and having the opportunity to do that restorative act when it comes to those individuals who committed the act upon us. And so, I've had, my experience with restorative justice has been magnificent. I've had, I had a wonderful opportunity to do the things with David Connick, Sujata, I forget her last name, Bolaji, I can't remember. Balagan, yeah, I can always hear her. I've also had an opportunity to speak with Lisa Ray, who does these things, restorative justice on an international basis, and the sort of and then doing circles with Exonerated Nation, led by Rick Walker, another exoneree, who's a board member of Exonerated Nation, who has been trained in the facilitation of circle keeping in regards to restorative justice. And it's been a wonderful experience. Not only has it helped me in my transition, restorative justice tenets has been my therapy. It has been my therapist, for me to say. The one, in other words, when I need to go to, circle keeping was instrumental in helping me to understand a lot of things, specifically because the way that they did it, when we did it with NCIP, having other individuals that had been affected, been victimized by the system, or been victimized, period, to hear to hear their suffering, to get away and not have to, I'm not thinking about my own suffering, but how they're suffering, it helped me heal. And restorative justice shows you the tenets and gives you the tenets, in other words, to do that. And so that's my experience with it, and it's been wonderful.
Mm-hmm. So Todd, can you talk about, so NCIP had organized 3 restorative justice retreats. Can you talk about the goals of that, why NCIP decided to do that, and the process? I'll remind you of those questions if you forget, but just talk about in general.
Well, is it all right if I just circle back to your last question about like what restorative justice is? So restorative justice is an approach where, like, one of the responses to a crime or a harm is that you organize a meeting between the victim and the offender, and then sometimes you include representatives of the wider community. And the goal is to share your experience of what happened, to discuss the harm, who was harmed and how, and then to come to a consensus of how you can repair that harm. And that can include a number of different things, apologies or different actions, but essentially trying to restore the person who was affected, to make them whole again. But the key is that you involve the community. The community helps to develop how to heal from the harm, unlike our criminal justice system, where often the victim and the community is sort of removed from that process of how to proceed when a crime is committed. So that's sort of the more traditional model. But for our retreats, we used a restorative justice model called circle process, which Obie was referring to. And I can talk about the basics of circle process, but let me move on to the question that you posed, which was, why did we host what were the goals? Why did we host the retreats? Well, we decided to host these retreats because at the time, restorative justice was sort of a budding field in innocence work. It hadn't really been used in innocence work before, and we thought that it would be interesting for us to see how we could use it. We designed the retreats to have specific goals. We wanted to provide opportunities for healing for people who had been harmed by wrongful conviction. So that was sort of first and foremost, but we wanted to create bridges of understanding between people who were typically in opposition in criminal cases. So we had a number of different stakeholders involved, which I'll get to. We wanted to increase participants' storytelling and advocacy skills. We wanted to develop a cadre of spokespeople who could go out and advocate for system reform. And then we wanted to test and document a replicable model that other innocence projects could use, or other organizations could use and implement. So our retreats focused on 4 stakeholder groups. We had exonerated individuals, we had their family members, we had original crime victims whose cases involved a wrongful conviction, and we had NCIP staff members. I should say that no original crime victim or exonerated individual were involved in the same case. So they were all separate cases. So in a way, it was sort of, surrogate exonerated individuals and surrogate crime victims in that sense. But we held 3 retreats. One was in the winter of 2014. We held 2 in the summer of 2016. And I'm going to talk specifically about the 2016 retreats because those were the retreats that I was involved in and got to help plan and participate in. So the retreats were preceded by a lot of preparation. Like 75% of the work was the prep work. Once you start doing a circle, the circle just sort of guides itself in a way, but there's a lot of prep work that goes into it. So the first thing we did was to talk to experts in the community about what restorative justice is. And there were a lot of experts just in the Santa Clara University community. And what we found was when we asked, what is restorative justice? They all had a different answer. Everyone had a different idea of what restorative justice was, but they all agreed about what the basic principles were around circle process. So that was good. Mm-hmm. Besides learning about like what restorative justice is, we did a training. Obie had mentioned that Rick Walker had done a training. So Rick, who is on our advisory board, was involved in the training, as well as me and another NCIP staff member. And the training was led by Sujatha Baliga, who is a leading expert in restorative justice practices. And Sujatha also led NCIP's initial retreat in 2014. It was a 3-day, quite intense training program on how to be a circle keeper. There was a lot of planning around, what were the questions, the activities we were going to do to have, a fruitful and useful discussion. And then we also wanted to recruit a balanced group of participants. So balanced as far as race, gender, and stakeholder position. We didn't want anyone to feel isolated in any way. We did the retreats at Nature Bridge Retreat Center in Marin, in the Marin Headlands, right near the water. A really, really beautiful area right by the Golden Gate Bridge, which I think was nice. It helped people relax, and there were lots of activities to do there. And
how many days were the retreats?
So each retreat started on a Friday afternoon and ended on a Sunday afternoon. So they were about 2 days to 2.5 days each. Each retreat had 20 participants. Most of the participants in the first retreat also came back for the second retreat, but there were a few that couldn't. So we had a few new participants in the second retreat. But all of the retreats involved sharing of experiences and talking about sort of the harms that everyone had felt, but the 2 retreats also had different goals. So the goal of the first retreat was to give participants an opportunity to heal and to start to build a community of support just within the folks who were attending. And then the goal of the second retreat was to continue that healing process, to continue to build that community of support, but then also to provide storytelling skills to the participants. So we brought in a professional storyteller who worked with everyone there to help them tell their story in an effective way. And so, the goal being, if individuals wanted to go out and advocate for change, that they would have the tools to do that. We use the circle process for both retreats, where participants sit in a circle, they share experiences and learn from one another just by listening to the stories and the things that others are saying. And it was really, really, really important for us to create a safe space for everyone, so that people felt like they could feel a range of emotion, from grief to anger to sadness. And I think that people at the retreats really shared those emotions. You really bond with people when you cry with them, and when you laugh with them, and when you go through all of these emotions. So yeah, I mean, Obie, I don't know if you want to add anything. I feel like
I definitely chime in right there. I mean, I have to. So it was 2. I was trying to remember, was it the 2 in that late month? But yeah, it was. But the experience there doing those things, it is all that what Todd just said, and it's more, because we had breakout sessions, and then you had when you had your time, you sort of kind of your timeouts with everybody, kind of a little break in between the sessions. And then he talked about the scenery, and it was an absolutely relaxing, beautiful scenery, and it gave us an opportunity during the break in those sessions to absorb the information and absolutely take in the stories that we were hearing from everyone during the course of that session. And I think that there, and having those moments alone, walking with individuals, and he talked about that bond, which created that bond, because not only after hearing those stories and realizing them, individuals had a chance to go back to connect with individuals on an individual basis, to talk with them individually about those things. And it was just a beautiful thing. And again, the takeaway from there for me was, I gotta practice this, man. Where do I take this? How do I take this and use this in my circle, right? In the individuals, how can I be creative? And I think that not only is that the takeaway, but the takeaway that you're going out from that place and you're not doing that on your own. That you have a community, because you realize the sort of kind of, the drudgery, the tiredness in it. You guys come back together like we did, came back together to share those stories again, to build again. And it's a beautiful community building process.
Mm-hmm. Talk about, Obie, the exonerated community, like from these experiences of healing and talking and storytelling and sharing. Talk about how that sort of impacted the community, the exonerated community. Did it build bonds and strength?
I mean, like, if it, from that group and from the other couple of groups that we're in, it impacted them a great deal. I always talk about, I think I mentioned this to you guys about, when we're talking, look at the result of those retreats and look what has happened to those individuals that has left those retreats to do things within those communities because of the process of healing there. Me, myself, after the retreat, went on to, in my process, in my journey, I've established a national nonprofit now. Let's look at who is this? The brother, well, Sonny and Peter, who was also part of those things. They've went off to also be creative in their life afterwards. And so these retreats really affected us in a way, in other words, to where it gave us not only the skills, in other words, like Todd talked about, to be able to tell our story in an effective way, but in other words, to be able to use those skills to be creative and to help other individuals in other places. And so, like I said from the very beginning, I really look at it as a community building process, because what happens is that, from those tools, in other words, that we was able to gather from the restorative justice techniques that we gathered from these retreats with NCIP, we were able to build communities within our places when we went back. And for us, that's what's the biggest thing, right? Because we feel so isolated when we go back to our own places, and when we're not together, we feel like, man, we out here by ourselves trying to do this stuff, and it's hard, and this and that. And so these tools here gives us the opportunity, in other words, to exercise that in our own, to make our circle, to create those things. And it was, like I said, it's just, I can only speak good things about restorative justice.
So, Obie, you just hosted a virtual convening focused on restorative justice just this week. Can you tell us a bit about that and how that went? And what was that process?
Yeah, absolutely. So Exonerated Nation had an opportunity, in other words, to convene a group of individuals to come together on a convening, talking about Restorative Justice International. And we had a young lady by the name of Lisa Ray to come in to talk about some of the work, in other words, and what is Restorative Justice International, and how they, and the work that they do in the field, that like what Todd said, like, there's many different sort of kind of ways to restorative justice and the uses of restorative justice. And, people got all kind of different kind of ways, in other words, that they approach it. And for her, and for the way that Restorative Justice International approaches, it just was intriguing to me. And so it turned out really great. She had an opportunity to talk about the work that they do. We also she talked about the surrogate opportunity, in other words, that she was able to create inside these institutions, the effect of that, having, not the original crime victim and the original complainant of that, but individuals that had suffered the effect, and how she went into these things, not realizing that this is what was going to happen, how these things are going to happen. And so it turned out magnificent, because the exonerees and other individuals who came on, I heard afterwards that they needed that, right? They needed the information about those tools, even in respect to, and how that in regards to our community, when it comes to prosecutors, judges, defense attorneys, jurors, and those sorts, and how restorative justice applies in that area. And she talked a little bit about the work that she was doing with Maurice Carwell, and just helping them tell their story. I think that was on that David Green her and David Green was doing those things, because again, it's a travesty what's transpiring with him, in respect to his restorative, them restoring him. And so I was really interested in her approach and why she got involved in those things. And like I said, she used, her approach is restitution. And I was like, wow. And so I had to have her come on and to talk to our community. It turned out really great. The convening was, impactful for a lot of individuals.
Yeah. So in these retreats, obviously you're talking, and a lot of information is coming out about what communities need and other things like that. Like you said, you started Exonerated Nation. You also put on additional forums and things like that related to health, mental health,
Right.
other things like that, whole being type of thing, right?
Yeah.
Can you talk about, both of you, just some of the things that have come out of restorative justice retreats that sort of lead to additional supports that are provided within the community? Like for you, like for the, just talking specifically, I'm thinking about your health retreat that you did in Sacramento. Now, I don't know, a couple of years ago.
Yeah, a few years ago, yeah, with the Sierra Health Foundation. That was absolutely wonderful. So, before all this COVID stuff, we were really in the mindset is that, and this is for us, is that realizing that the push for us, our direction is the information that we're going to be able to get from the exonerated population. And so we had a health retreat to be able to extrapolate the information exactly. If we're asking about, you're saying that we need health care, we needed to extrapolate the information. And so we needed to ask, what does that look like? And what is, and what is the ask, and so forth and so on. And so the Sierra Health Foundation was absolutely great to us. They donated the time and the space there and catered. And what happened was from that retreat there, or that convening that we had there, AB 1050 came, which was the bill that had gotten passed, which gave exonerated individuals, when they came home, $1,000 gave money, automatic enrollment into Medi-Cal, Medicaid, expungement, all the way to the department, up to the Department of Justice. And so those are the things that comes out of that right there. It's it's that information. It's the, what do you know? What is needed? What are we looking at and how? And so, when you get that, then you have to figure out how to, and all of those things there. But that's what these convenings does. Those convenings does give you an opportunity, in other words, to hear exactly from those individuals that have been affected by those things, and not only hear from them, but to hear from them the best, what do they think is the best approach to be able to get that, so they can then take that information to sort through it, to then be able to go through, then to ping out, let's approach these things this way. And we were able to be successful with that, doing that. And like I said, with the passage of AB 1050.
Yeah. So I just hammering home that restorative justice is also a journey. Todd, I want you to talk about too, the different things that have come out for NCIP that we've done out of that.
I mean, I think what has come out of it is that that when you go to one of these retreats, it's not a one-off type thing. It is a journey. You have to continue to do the work and continue to go to these types of gatherings and these types of retreats, because it's really the community that helps you heal. It's hearing other stories and being able to emote with other people who can in some way relate to what you've been through. And so I know that we've had people who went to our initial retreats, and they've gone to additional retreats held by other organizations, Healing Justice, that was started by Jennifer Thompson and Katie Monroe. So, and continuing to go to these types of retreats and these types of events has been extremely healing for those individuals. So I guess what I'm getting out of it is that at least for NCIP, that the work needs to continue, that it's not just a one-off thing, and that you really need to look to the community to help you heal.
Right. And I mean, like I just throwing, I think just the one worder for that is, for the both of those, is that I think it's developing, right? It's developing, because what happens from when individuals go to these retreats, it develops things, and like I said, people go off and be creative. And so they develop opportunities for individuals such as myself In other words, to be creative in our spots because of the healing process that we go through, and not being bogged down in anger, frustration, blame, accuser, all of those things there, but looking to the tools, in other words, that we gather from restorative justice process and these healing retreats that we have and these convenings that we have to be effective in our community and effective in our thinking. I think that in both cases, that is really about developing. We also develop leaders. So it's a leadership development opportunity, in other words, because like what Todd was talking about, is that for those individuals that want to go on, this is why they did, brought someone in to help us to be able to tell our stories, for those individuals that wanted to go on to continue in the advocacy work so they could do those things in an effective manner. And it worked. It works tremendously. And I can point to several different exonerated individuals who've participated either in the retreats that NCIP have, the retreats that Exonerated Nation have, the retreats that Jennifer Thompson have with Healing Justice. I can name of several different exonerated individuals that came from those things that has went on to do magnificent things because of the healing process that they go through. So.
And
I think, oh, sorry. I was just going to say, I think one of the things that has come out of doing these retreats is really understanding the importance of listening and hearing what others are saying, and not always talking, but taking in just everything around you. We at the retreats we use a talking piece, right? I'm sure people are familiar with the talking piece, but you pass it, you introduce a question prompt, and you pass the talking piece around the circle, and you can only answer the question if you have the talking piece.
Yeah,
and,
I got
some people, sometimes it's hard for them to not talk, but it really does help. Only the person with the talking piece can talk, and everyone else has to listen. And I think just going through that very simple exercise is just so helpful. It's so helpful, and it just allowing people to listen and take in everything that others are saying. So.
Were you looking for your talking piece?
Yeah, I was looking for mine because I was like, oh, but I remembered I took it upstairs for me and Denise.
A little informal restorative justice in the household.
I was like, I'm gonna bring my talking piece up here for us so that we can use it.
That's good.
Just one more thing I wanted to say, because that actually reminded me when you said a talking piece for you and Denise, which is that other people who have been in these retreats, they have taken the skills that they've learned and they have applied it to other spheres of their life, their family, their I don't know, church groups, or whatever it may be. It's not just to be used in this context. They can use it in so many different contexts in their life to help, solve problems and to help heal. So
yeah. And the talking piece definitely helps solve the problem of not listening. I'm gonna tell you.
It's also about building that sort of confidence that people are listening to you when you're talking, which then brings me to the segue, a not so subtle segue, into the public policy work and reform work that's happening, and engaging people that have participated in restorative justice retreats within all of these organizations, going to the Capitol in Sacramento and advocating for some of the things, Obie, that you brought up with policy. And just talk about that a bit, that the importance of having that voice at the Capitol, and how these types of things, and Todd mentioned the storytelling workshop that NCIP did, those things that actually help to get people to have the confidence that people are listening, but also the confidence that they can tell their story in a concise way in front of legislators and staffers. Right. So talk about that.
I mean, like, look, so just giving one example. So they did one example is this, and hopefully they're comfortable with me utilizing their names, but I can name them off, starting from Xavier Johnson, Rick Walker, Bill Richardson, Gloria Killen, myself, Maurice Carwell. So what happened is that NCIP does these, hooked us up with this whole storytelling thing, how to be able to tell your story effectively. Now, the first time that I had an opportunity to go to the state capitol was through an invite through a young man named Ignacio Hernandez with the Hernandez Strategy Group. And we were talking, by invite by Patty Lopez on a bill initially up on for prosecutorial misconduct. And so, I hadn't, at that point, I don't believe I hadn't done no storytelling workshop, how to tell your story. And so I was just up there, talking about what happened with my stuff. I'm just, I'm telling the whole spiel. I'm on. And, and so how do I know that I was just telling the whole spiel? Because crazy, because they heard me on the prosecutorial misconduct, but they also heard me when I was telling them there was no services for me when I came home. And so that's because I was blabbering on. I was just going, not blabbering. Yeah, I could be a little bit verbose, but I was verbosing, right? And so so 1909 happened. The passage of 1909. Prosecutors are now held accountable in the state of California for withholding evidence against a person's innocence when they knowingly and willfully do so. But also what came from there is AB 672, Obie's law, because me, not having the skill set just to stay focused on AB 1909, I was talking about the conditions of what was going on. But then I did the thing with NCIP, with the storytelling workshop, how to be able to tell your story. And I found myself back at the Capitol again, now again with several other exonerees there. And we were talking about, at that point, it was AB 1050. It was AB 1050. And in AB 1050, it was about just a couple of specific things: medical, expungement, and we were just focusing in on that. And so I stayed in on that. I was able to do what they call an elevator speech, right? Going there, to hold the arc and all this and everything. And I seen those things happening in the other exonerated individuals that was there telling these stories as well, who had participated. And because again, when we went back to talk about Obie's law and advocate for that, we were still doing that same stuff. Everybody was in there trying to get their whole story in, like from beginning to end. So it works tremendously. Not only it works for the individual, but it works when we're telling our stories to legislators and also assembly individuals, because they're big. You got to be in and out of there sometime. And so you got to, storytelling is a great tool to do that.
Yeah. Todd, do you want to chime in on anything else around storytelling before we move on? Because we are going to wrap up in just about 3 minutes, but I want to touch on looking ahead to the next legislative session before we wrap up. So Todd, I want you to have an opportunity to say anything else about community education, storytelling, that impact on restorative justice retreats.
I think just in the current climate, I want to just commend you on being able to do for NCIP, to host these types of events, these community education events that really keep us out there, that really allow people to know what we do and how we do it. So that's all I want to say. I'm happy to be on here, and thanks for setting this up.
Awesome. Yeah, it's awesome. And I do want to segue into our public policy reform, because that is something that is obviously ramping up right now. The legislative session begins in January. So everybody's busy planning for what they're going to co-sponsor and support, NCIP being one of them, through the California Innocence Coalition. Obie, I want to give you an opportunity to talk about any priorities that you want to that you see out there. Then I also want to touch on the California Racial Justice Act that is effective January 1st, 2021, and some of the things that NCIP is involved in pushing that forward. So Obie, talk about priorities for Exonerated Nation, because you're doing public policy work, some of the priorities that you see leading up to January.
I mean, one of the conversations that we've been, one of the priority conversations we've been kicking around is that of surrounding mental health. Just last year, the Exonerated Nation was successful with a couple of bills, AB 701 and 702, which assisted individuals with housing and education, but realizing and appreciating for those individuals to do well in those two spots, to do good at home and to do well at work and at school, that their mental health is important. And so we've been really prioritizing that, looking at sort of again, getting back to that health summit, what is the acts there? And I'm really looking forward to having that sort of that really healthy conversation with the exonerated population about what are we really asking for when we ask for mental health, when we're saying that mental health is a high priority. We also talked a little bit about Social Security too as well, and what that looks like on the federal level. And so So that's what we're prioritizing right now, really looking at those and how to approach that come 2021.
Awesome. So just as a little aside, the lovely Denise Anthony says hello. She's watching. And a shout out to everybody who's tuned in here. So just a couple things. So the Racial Justice Act in California was signed by Governor Newsom just about a month ago. It is effective January 1st, 2021. NCIP is participating in a broader coalition to sort of push things forward and make sure that we're ready for things around the Racial Justice Act. So we're going to be hosting, not us personally, but the coalition is hosting a series of trainings. And so just stay tuned on anything around that, but we are actively engaged in that coalition and working on ensuring that people are aware of what the Racial Justice Act is and the implications, and moving forward and making sure we're ready for that. We are prioritizing, as I mentioned, with our upcoming legislative session. So we are prioritizing within the California Innocence Coalition, which includes us and the California Innocence Project in San Diego and Loyola Project for the Innocent in LA. Prioritizing what our agenda is and pushing that out, and we'll let you know on that. We'll have some engagement opportunities for our communities. So we're looking at a couple different tools to get people involved so that they can write to legislators automatically with pre-populated text and social media posts and things like that. So that's our really community engagement and community organizing around our policy reform efforts. So I encourage everybody to stay tuned to all of that and those efforts on ncip.org, our website, and all of our social media platforms, obviously. And so obviously to Exonerated Nation as well, and all of their efforts, they are posting on social media, on their website. So everybody stay tuned. And if there's any way that we can promote what you're doing, we will always do that. And so I'm going to wrap it up by saying thank you very, very much to both of you for participating. And we'll be hosting something in November, so stay tuned for that. And also in December, we will be having also a Human Rights Day event on December 10th. And so stay tuned for more details on that. That'll be a very exciting online short event, so stay tuned. But thank you very much for participating, and thank you everybody for watching. This will be on our Facebook page, so you can view it and send it out to anybody who was not able to join us live right now. So thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.